Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages. Today we're going to talk about a story that really caught my eye based on the headline, and of course, it's the headline of this video that an 8-year-old committed an armed carjacking in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's ridiculous and it's absurd, and even though this is a very extreme example of a phenomenon that we've been covering on this channel, I think it deserves to be highlighted just due to the fact that it's that outrageous. But before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And for my podcast listeners, Apple, Spotify, and Google's podcasting platform, thank you.
Camera footage shows a police chase yesterday in Montgomery. Police say the person they were chasing was just 8 years old, and they say the child stole that car at gunpoint.
So the headline here is not misleading. An 8-year-old decided to commit an armed carjacking at 11 a.m. on West Fairview Avenue in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, unsurprisingly, because this young man was a child, he ended up getting into a car accident, and he led police on a very dangerous police chase during the course of this robbery and fleeing from the police.
Hey Google, call the Montgomery Police Department.
Witness video shows what police say is an 8-year-old driving a stolen car. The witness said he saw the child hit another car and then drive off.
So here we have a good Samaritan who saw the whole thing. He saw the boy actually get into a car accident and then flee that car accident. And as you can see from his cell phone video, he called the police in order to inform him of this. But one of the things that I find incredibly odd about this story is that after this kid got into an accident, he decided that he was going to pick up supposedly some hitchhikers in order to drive them to a nearby deli.
I just naturally kind of wanted to follow him because I didn't think it was right for him to just get away with hitting someone. But as I was following him, I realized at some point it was a little boy.
The witness said he continued to follow the car, and at one point it turned onto the boulevard going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, he picked up some adults on Norman Bridge Road. It was 2 guys, and they just wanted to ride to, I think, American Deli. And so I followed him there.
Now, thankfully, nobody was hurt in this instance. The kid was arrested. He was held facing charges. Now he's 8 years old, so I'm not expecting him to face any serious charges, but I can only imagine what it must be like to be 2 adults that decide to hitchhike from an 8-year-old boy who is armed with a firearm behind the wheel of a vehicle of a stolen car. But this is indicative overall of a problem in the United States of America, and that is the increase in carjackings that we've seen, and specifically among young people. Now, typically, the carjackings are actually done by teenagers, but we should break down the numbers so that you can understand how big of a problem this actually is and how much worse it's getting, because unlike a couple of other crimes across this country that are up, that have seen dramatic increases, carjackings are actually in a lot of places and almost nationwide at the peak, the worst portion of time in American history, the coveted 1990s levels. So for all of you who have decided that crime doesn't exist unless it's at its absolute worst, guess what? Carjackings are right about there in huge swaths of this country. For example, the number of reported incidents has nearly quadrupled in Philadelphia from 2019 to 2021, and it's on track to double this year. This article was written in 2022, so that means they're up 8-fold since 2019, since before the Black Lives Matter riots. Now, we've talked about on this channel multiple different times that a number of policies and a number of things have led to these dramatic increases. First and foremost, you have District Attorney Larry Krasner, who's basically not prosecuting anything, going ultra soft on youth offenders, and that has led to an adequate response from those youthful offenders in order to prevent them from committing those carjackings. On top of that, we even covered an individual story of somebody who got their car stolen, described the suspects, actually had an Apple AirTag. The police went to the location of the Apple AirTag, recovered the car, arrested 2 of the suspects. They were armed with a firearm that aligned with what was actually described by the person, but Larry Krasner refused to charge in that specific case, claiming that the description of 2 black males by this Asian victim played into racial stereotypes, therefore it was not worth prosecuting. This is the kind of attitude that is incredibly prevalent in cities like Philadelphia, and it has led to an 8-fold increase in carjackings. Eightfold, 8x. That is dramatic. Again, we're talking 1990s levels. And by the way, Philadelphia is also at 1990s levels, actually worse than 1990s levels, worst of all time levels of homicide. This is a huge deal. Now, Chicago had more than 1,900 carjackings last year. Again, this is 2021 numbers. We have to wait on the delay, which was the highest number in decades. And 2 months into 2022, the number of armed carjackings in the city of New Orleans was already 2/3 of the whole year's tally from 2019. DC also saw a dramatic increase in carjackings. Now, each and every one of those cities that I just named, and it wasn't me, by the way, it was actually the New York Times, not exactly a conservative source, all have some combination of, if not all of, one of these left-wing prosecutors who doesn't prosecute anybody, a left-wing mayor who has presided over a huge decline in their police force, and they've also instituted some form of a do not pursue policy, which of course leads to more and more people thinking they can get away with it because the police have to ask for permission in order to pursue you. All of these factors have led into dramatic increases in carjackings. Now, there's an additional factor that I also think needs to be highlighted because it is pointed out in this New York Times article. The idea that we all, or a lot of us, use push button start in order to get our vehicles up and running has also led to a dramatic increase in car thefts. And the reason for this is because it used to be that you can do some kind of hot wiring, you can do some kind of technique or whatever in order to start the car if you broke into it without the key being present. But since you're required to have the key fob on you at the time that you're driving the vehicle, this is no longer an option. So we went soft on crime, and due to changes in technology, this has led to more and more incidents that of course have the chance of being escalated to violence, not just against the innocent person driving their vehicle, but against the criminal, because you should be able to defend yourself from a carjacking, and many people will, and this is an absolute disaster for our country. Now, obviously, the keyed ignition is not a solution for this. We know that the Kia boys break into the Hyundais and Kias that actually have that manufacturing defect with the ones of their vehicles that don't have the push button start. But overall, we've had a change in technology that when we went soft on crime, which now ultimately ends up leading us to a more violent instance. We have more likelihood for things going wrong because the criminals who want to get vehicles are now incentivized to do an armed carjacking against a driver, and that is inherently more dangerous than just trying to break into an unoccupied vehicle for obvious reasons. And accidents are up as the result of this. This little 8-year-old got into an accident. He also had a firearm.
Police say the chase ended in a crash and no one was hurt. Officers say they did recover a gun at the scene. The 8-year-old's name is not being released, but charges are pending.
Youth possession of firearms are up. Youth being killed by firearms and killing others by firearms are up. And this also simultaneously aligns with the decrease in prosecution of youthful offenders. Of course, obviously the 8-year-old is an outlier in this instance, but since your peak offending years start in and around age 15 and go up to age 24, the idea that we would go soft on a prime gang age absolutely makes no sense. Now, I don't know this for sure in terms of this 8-year-old kid. I don't know how he got possession of this firearm, but it is not unusual because of the lack of prosecution of youthful offenders for older members of gangs to pass off guns and or drugs to these young people, thus making them more likely to be armed than their older counterparts. This is a response, again, to the fact that they don't get more time for having the gun on them. I remember an incident, we covered it on this channel, of a 13-year-old that was actually killed by the police in the city of Chicago. And while there was outrage at the police because the 13-year-old tried to ditch the gun, even though it was clearly and obviously a split-second decision, the fact of the matter is, we saw via the surveillance video that the older person, who I believe was about 22-year-old, was the one firing the gun, and he passed it off to the kid because he knew that in the city of Chicago, if the 13-year-old gets caught with a firearm at 2 o'clock in the morning, then we're going to end up in a situation where he's not going to face the same consequences as a 20-year-old. So we're actually, in our effort to go softer on kids, to be more kind to children, leading to circumstances circumstances where they're in significantly more danger. Now, I don't know this to be true for the 8-year-old, but it seems rather odd that he would have access to a firearm, and I can't find anywhere in the reporting any equivalent charges for the parents who may have been the actual owner of that gun. It just seems like this kind of came out of nowhere. The fact that he picked up 2 older people seems like it might lend credence to my theory, but I don't have anything to support that. I don't think the kid was trying to go from carjacker Grand Theft Auto simulator to real life to Uber simulator, so I just don't really have an explanation for this. Now, the New York Times article, of course, talks about how poverty is probably the cause of this because they're a left-wing rag and that's what they gotta do, but even they acknowledge that none of this fully explains what officials are talking about in terms of this trend. The ages of the people who are being arrested for these carjackings are 14 years old, 12 years old, and 11-year-olds. By the way, I just want to say, 13-year-olds, what are you doing? You're not doing the carjacking? Maybe that's the age where people decide they're not going to do it. But a lot of these people end up being charged with murder because notably, these are armed encounters. They're kids with firearms that are stealing these cars for joyrides. And the headline of this New York Times article, this op-ed, actually hits and cuts to the core of the issue, which is, of course, that this is a game. It's played for entertainment. They're doing this for the joy of it. There seems to be no rhyme or reason. There seems to be no plan to sell it or anything like that. But as we learned from the Kia Boys documentary, this is a status symbol, the fact that you can do this. It's fun to ride around in the vehicle. And of course, this leads to more danger, but overall, the idea behind this is that they're doing it for the joy of it. They're doing it for the fun of it. And one of the reasons why you know this is likely not due to economic strife is because you can look at the data from the U.S. Attorney in terms of the District of Columbia, and it will tell you that overall, in a bunch of categories, youth violent crime is significantly down. However, carjacking specifically have tripled amongst those youthful offenders. Over half the people that are being arrested for carjackings in the District of Columbia are under 18. And a lot of them are not just 17 or 16, they tend to skew younger as outlined by this piece. And again, the 8-year-old is an outlier situation, but it should be very concerning to everybody in the American population that an 8-year-old feels comfortable enough to commit an armed carjacking at 11 o'clock in the morning, then drive around, pick up 2 adults. They're totally fine with getting in a car with an 8-year-old behind the wheel, gets into multiple accidents, runs from the police. It's at an absurd level, and we need to do something about it. We need to fight back. We need to target illegal guns in the possession of minors, because obviously this is leading to dramatic problems throughout our major cities and our country as a whole. I mean, again, the fact that over 200 kids, underage people, have been caught between Prince George's County and Washington, D.C., is absolutely alarming, and we should be paying attention to it. Now, by the way, again, I will emphasize, I'm highlighting this New York Times article, which came out in early 2022 and only had preliminary numbers, but I've checked them myself, and they have not gotten better in any of the major places that have been highlighted. In fact, in many circumstances, they've only gotten worse since then. It's just that this article tends to lay out the data in the way that I like, and I want you guys to read it in full so you can understand what's going on in terms of our nation, in terms of auto thefts, and specifically how auto thefts are skewing youthful and towards carjackings. No longer are we dealing with a situation where most of these thefts are break-ins and then people stealing the car in a way that they're intending to be non-confrontational, non-violent. This is all about that life of you confronting somebody with a gun, and it's led to a significant increase in people dying over their vehicles. This is not the proper way. It does not help the youthful offenders to let them do this over and over and over again. These no pursuit policies end up creating more danger because the criminals are in fact aware of them, and the idea that we would just let them drive even more recklessly and reward that by terminating the pursuit has been an absolute disaster. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute madness on our streets. Till next time.